Hey, my name is Sister Ceil McGowan. I live here at Holy Hill Hermitage in Skryne, County Sligo, Ireland. And this is a talk on integrating our brokenness into our lives. So once again, in the Gospel today, Jesus is telling us about the web of exchange. And he does this particularly in John's Gospel. He keeps saying over and over again, the Father sent me, and then I receive everything I am, I receive from the Father, and I pass it on to you. And that's really what the Trinitarian love life is all about. It is each person of the Trinity passing on everything they have, completely loving the other persons of the Trinity, and so it gets passed on. The Father passes it on to the Son passes it to the Spirit passes it to the Father. And then we are invited into that Trinitarian love life, so we become part of that love of exchange, a web of exchange, where we can also be filled by the love of God and pass it on to others. That's what we were made for. That's why God created us, is to be part of this enormous web of exchange, all a part of the love that he keeps pouring into the world. The problem with the web of exchange is that for a lot of reasons, this love keeps getting blocked. It would be so wonderful if we all just kept passing it on. But our problem is that for many people, it didn't get passed on to us. Or it got passed on to us in a twisted kind of way, or there's lots of barriers that we keep putting up. And as soon as we put up a barrier for another person, then that person is then going to be suffering from that barrier. As soon as one person is not loved and kind of stops it, then that stops it all the way down the line, if that makes sense. That's the problem. The thing about the web of exchange is that means that everything we do affects everybody around us. And it really affects the whole world. You know the butterfly effect, the butterfly in the Amazon who flaps its wings, and then it creates weather for the whole world. And that's pretty much what our lives are like, where everything that we do affects everybody in the web of exchange. And we are affected by everybody. And that's the other problem, is they said that many of us haven't received a lot of love, or in some way feel that we haven't, and so therefore we tend to then block the love onto the next person. But when we refuse, basically when we do that, when we refuse the love, when we put up a barrier and just say, look, life has not treated me very well, I'm not going to treat anybody else very well. Basically what we are doing is making ourselves miserable. And when we do that, and that is basically what Jesus is saying in the gospel when he says that he says he did not come in to condemn the world. He says that that basically he comes to save the world. All Jesus wants to do is gather us up in his love. That's why he came. He came to save the world. And he says, I'm not condemning you, my words are condemning you. In other words, and of course we know his words are truth and life. And so it's really just truth and life that's condemning us, in the sense that whenever we block love, then we create for ourselves this little world that love can't get into. And that's how we make ourselves miserable. And and that's the basic problem with the broken world, is that too many of us are doing that, are just staying in our own miserable little world and saying, okay, if the world isn't going to treat me well, I'll just be miserable. But what we need to do is get to the point where we can say, I need to break out of this. I need to break down these barriers. And that's when, of course, people come to AA, when they realize they have finally gotten to the bottom. There is something they really need to do, and they finally realize, I must put my life in somebody else's hands. I must put my hand, and of course, as Christians, we say we must put our life in God's hands. In the Beatitudes, the first Beatitude is, blessed are those who are poor in spirit. But there's another translation that I have read that I really like, which is, blessed are those who know their need of God. And that is really what it means to be poor in spirit, to get to that point where we know we need God. And often, to get to that point, we do have to be in bad shape. That's the reason, in fact, the classic thing is in Ireland, where the faith was very strong up until the Celtic Tiger. And all of a sudden, when everybody feels that they're independent, they're doing fine, what do we need God for? It's when we're in bad shape that we know we need God. During World War II, churches were filled. And then when times get good, churches empty out. So it's actually that misery that can save us, in a way. It's the misery of knowing that there's something wrong and that we need God. If we can reach out in it, that's the secret. Many people just sort of fester in it. But if we can reach out of that misery and do something about it, and what is it that we can do? And basically what Jesus tells us is what we have to do is bring love no matter what. In other words, love our enemies. That's what we have to do in order to change the environment around us. So if we feel like there are these people who are not loving us, then what we have to do is reach out in love to them, and then we can create a space for love. Even if that person who we see as our enemy doesn't love us back and never does love us back, which could happen, what we have done is lifted the bitterness from ourselves. We've lifted the anger from ourselves. And so we've changed ourselves. Even if we haven't changed the enemy, in a sense, we've changed the situation because we really have changed ourselves. That's why Jesus tells us to love our enemy, is in order to bring love into the world, to keep the love flowing in this web of exchange. That's what we have to do, is keep breaching that barrier and creating this space for love. John of the Cross, of course, said, "Where there is no love, put love, and there you will find love." And as he said, that love might not come from our enemy, but what we will do is in loving others, give God a space to come in. So the love will come from God, which is the love we really want anyway. Carmelites talk about this thing called realized union with God. And what they mean by that is that we all have union with God. Every single person on earth has been created by God and is only held in being because of our union with God. We all have always this union with God. But most of us don't enjoy it very much of the time. And so what Carmelites want to do is enjoy that union, and in order to do that, we have to realize that union. We have to realize that we are in union with God, that God loves us. That's our goal. And so by pouring love into the world, then God can pour love into us. And then we can begin to realize that we are so loved by God. And then begin to reach that union. And one of our flaws and our sins can keep us from realizing how much they are loved, but they don't have to. What they can do is help us to realize how much we need God and get us on the path. That's the thing that they can do. There's a poem by a woman named Vassar Miller that we read at Easter time at morning prayer, called A Fantasy on the Resurrection. Vassar Miller was a woman who had cerebral palsy and was crippled in some way. And she is imagining in this poem how people with disabilities will be when they get to heaven after they are resurrected. And we might think, well, all their disabilities will just be gone. But that's not what she thinks, because she thinks our disabilities were such an important part of us that in fact we'll still have them in heaven, but they'll make our heaven better, in a sense. So what she says is, flaws cling to flesh as dew clings to a rose. So the flaws will cling to her resurrected flesh in the same way that dew clings to a rose and makes it even more beautiful. Cripples limp as though they would prolong walking, a waltz. So a cripple's walk is going to be different from everybody else's walk, but it's going to be a particular, it's their walk, because that's who they are. That's who made them. It's such an important part of them. It made them who they are. That was such an important part of their struggle that when they get to heaven, they will still have that. I don't want to read the whole poem, but one other thing that she says in it is, the blind eyes keep half shut as to fold a vision that men never glimpse by staring. So in other words, through their blindness, they saw things that people who just look at things from the outside never see. So once again, the blind who are in heaven will carry that glorified wound, that the fact that because that does make them who they are. And then at the end she says, the nail gnarled, so these would be all these people with disabilities, who's really all of us, isn't it, have caught heaven like a bright ball. Not in their reknit wonder, but in their wounds lies Christ's grace engraven. That's where the grace comes in, through the wounds. In the side still breached, the hands still broken. In the Easter readings that we've been hearing during this Easter season, Jesus always talks about, put your fingers in my hands. See the wounds, they're still there. His resurrected body still has the wounds in his hands, the wounds in his side. Because his wounds also are part now of who he is and have been glorified. They're kind of almost a badge of honor in a sense. And in the same ways, our own wounds will become that. Both physical wounds and psychological wounds. Mm-hmm. Those are the things we struggle with. Those are the things that make us who we are, that make us grow in love. And so therefore, in heaven, they will become glorified wounds. Last Sunday, we saw a movie called A Bump on the Way, which is a great movie, and we really would recommend it. And in it, it is about a 44-year-old single mother of a teenager who becomes pregnant. And it's kind of a flip on the usual situation of the teenager becoming pregnant. The mother is kind of the teenager, and the teenager is the adult at the beginning of the movie. And the teenager is so embarrassed and so furious that this has happened. And basically but her mother just keeps loving her no matter what. Her mother just keeps pouring out the love. Never gives up on her daughter. Never, and just keeps telling her how much she loves her. And then it really isn't until the girl makes a serious mistake that she is able to open up to her mother's love. She makes a mistake. She discovers she's not perfect either. Wow. And that's what breaks that barrier. That's what can breach that barrier so that then the love can then flow through this web of exchange. And then when it does, it affects everything. Of course it affects the baby. And it will affect the baby for the rest of his life, but it also affects all their friends. That's what happens. When we breach the barrier, we can push this love along. And so we don't have to be perfect. That's not what we are meant for. But what we do have to do is keep trying to keep love alive, to keep receiving God's love and passing it on in whatever way we can. And we have to do it not because Jesus condemns us if we don't, but because it's the only way for us to be happy. So when we are living in the web of exchange, it's sort of like a dance, where everyone is enjoying this music. And we are the ones that then sometimes turn off the music. And if we do that, it's not so much that God condemns us, it's that we have condemned ourselves. This is what we have done to ourselves. But when we feel like someone hasn't respected us, or someone has slighted us, or hasn't loved us enough, and then we close ourselves off to that person, that's what we're doing. We're just turning off the music, and we are affecting everybody else in the web of exchange. Somebody in a family does that, it affects the whole family. Somebody at work does that, it affects everybody in the office place. Somebody in a group of friends does it, it affects the whole group. And then it goes on to be every family is then affects other families, that sort of thing. So everything we do is very important, and the more love we can pour into the world, the more love will just continue to spread through it. So of course we're all broken, but we don't have to act out of our brokenness. We can always choose love instead of a negative reaction. So that's what Jesus means when he says we need to live in the light instead of the darkness. And you remember that great song from Leonard Cohen called Anthem, in which he says, "Ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in."
Yeah.